The colder the rain, the fewer the visitors, and Corporal Sienna Okafor had spent the last 14 months making sure of that. The cabin sat at the edge of a logging road outside Vermilion Bay, Ontario, deep enough into the bush that the nearest neighbor was a 12-minute drive and a philosophical decision away. The road itself washed out every spring, and Sienna never fixed it. That was intentional. The potholes were a moat. The dead spruce leaning over the gate was a drawbridge she never raised. She had come back from Kandahar with two things she hadn't left with: a metal plate behind her left ear and a dog named Axel. Axel was a Belgian Malinois, compact and coiled, with a scar across his muzzle from a wire that had caught him during a compound breach in 2019. He had been retired from service 6 weeks before Sienna was. The timing felt less like coincidence, and more like something the universe had arranged without asking either of them. They were both done. They both knew it. They moved north together the way a tide pulls back, quietly, completely without explanation. The townspeople in Vermilion Bay had learned within the first 3 months not to approach the cabin unannounced. It wasn't anything Sienna said. It was Axel. He didn't bark. He didn't growl. He simply appeared between the visitor and Sienna and held perfectly still, and that stillness was more terrifying than any noise. The mail carrier left packages at the gate. The woman from the church who'd tried to bring a casserole left it on the post and never came back. Sienna hadn't asked her not to. Axel had simply looked at her, and that was enough. Sienna was 31 years old. She had a commendation she kept in a shoebox under the bed. She had a scar along her collarbone that she told no one about. She slept 4 hours a night and spent the other 4 lying flat on the floor beside Axel's crate, listening to the dog breathe, because it was the only sound that slowed her heart down to something manageable. She wasn't broken. She would have been furious at that word. She was recalibrated. That was how she thought of it. She had calibrated herself for a world where threats were constant and trust was a liability, and now she was living in a world where the biggest daily decision was whether to drive to the co-op for eggs or just go without. Her nervous system hadn't gotten the memo. It was still scanning, still calculating exit routes, still reading the angle of a stranger's shoulders before their mouth opened. Axel understood this. He always had. In Kandahar, he had been her partner and her early warning system. Now he was her perimeter. She ran him through drills every morning in the field behind the cabin. Not because either of them needed the practice, but because the structure of it settled something in both of them. They needed a mission, even a small one, even a pretend one. On the morning everything changed, the rain had been coming down since before dawn. The kind of rain that didn't thunder or lightning, just fell, flat and grey and relentless, the way northern Ontario rain did in October. Sienna had been splitting wood in the lean-to at the side of the cabin. Her breath fogging, her rhythm mechanical. Axel curled against the cabin wall with his chin on his paws and his eyes open. She felt it before she heard it. A vibration in the ground, then the sound of tires. Not the crunch of someone turning around on the gravel like most people did when they saw the gate. These tires had stopped. Then a door. Sienna set down the axe and straightened. Axel was already standing. The voice came before the person did. A woman's voice calling from the gate. "Hello? Is anyone home? I'm sorry to bother you. I need help, please." The word please landed differently than most things did. Sienna didn't move toward the gate, but she didn't go inside either. She stood in the lean-to with her arms at her sides, reading the sound. Young, not steady, something wrong in the breathing. "My car went off the road about 1 kilometer back," the voice called again. "My phone's dead. I saw the light. I'm sorry, I'm not trying to intrude." Axel looked at Sienna, not with urgency, just with waiting. He would do whatever she did. She walked to the gate. The woman on the other side was younger than her voice had suggested. Mid-20s, maybe, standing in the rain, in a thin hospital-issue fleece that had soaked through entirely. Dark hair plastered to her face. She had a gash above her eyebrow that had stopped bleeding but hadn't been cleaned. Her hands were shaking, and not from cold alone. She was holding herself the way people hold themselves when they're trying very hard not to fall apart in front of a stranger. She looked at Axel and went absolutely still. He was looking at her the way he looked at everything, measuring, reading, deciding. "He won't hurt you," Sienna said. She surprised herself by saying it. The woman's eyes moved from the dog to Sienna. "I'm Philippa Lamont," she said. "I work at the Lake of the Woods District Hospital. I was on my way home from a double shift. The road. There was water on the road and I overcorrected." Sienna looked past her. The woman's car was a small blue hatchback, and it was nose down in the ditch about 70 meters back, its hazards blinking through the rain in slow orange pulses. She unlocked the gate. She told herself it was because the woman was clearly injured. That was the reason. The only reason. Philippa Lamont stepped inside, and Axel, who had not allowed another human being into this property for 14 months, stepped aside to let her pass. Inside the cabin, Sienna pointed at the chair nearest the wood stove. "Sit." Then, because it came out harsher than she'd meant it to, "Please." She found the first aid kit under the sink, which was well stocked in the way that only someone with field training would maintain. She set it on the table. She didn't offer to help. She put it there and stepped back. Philippa looked at the kit, then at Sienna, then said quietly, "I'm actually a nurse. I can manage. I know. You know. The way you're holding your arm, you've already checked for fractures. You know the gash doesn't need stitches. You're prioritizing." Something shifted in Philippa's face. Not surprise exactly. More like recognition. "You're military," she said. It wasn't a question. "Was," Sienna said. Philippa cleaned the gash above her eyebrow without flinching, working steadily and efficiently, her hands calmer now that she had a task. She glanced at Axel, who had settled by the wood stove, not close to her but not far. He was watching her with his head resting on his front paws. "What's his name?" "Axel, Belgian Malinois." "Yeah, he's beautiful." Sienna said nothing. Philippa applied the steri-strip with the careful economy of someone who'd done it 1,000 times in fluorescent light, and then she sat back and looked around the cabin. It wasn't a long look. She wasn't intrusive about it. But Sienna caught it. The single chair pulled close to the stove, the 2 bowls on the kitchen floor, one for water, one for food, the walls bare except for a topographic map of the surrounding bush, the absence of photographs. "You've been out here a while," Philippa said. "About 14 months. Alone. Not alone." Sienna looked at Axel. Philippa nodded slowly, like that made all the sense in the world. Then she said, "Can I use your landline? I'll call a tow truck and get out of your hair." Sienna brought her the phone. She stood by the window while Philippa called, watching the rain, listening to Axel's breathing and the woman's steady voice on the phone. The tow truck would be an hour and a half minimum. The roads. When Philippa hung up, she sat with her hands in her lap for a moment. Not uncomfortable with the silence, just in it. That was the second thing Sienna noticed. The first had been the way she stood at the gate, holding herself together on willpower. The second was this. She didn't try to fill the quiet. Most people couldn't do that. Most people got nervous and talked. Philippa Lamont sat in the chair and let the fire do its work, and said nothing, and Axel watched her from the hearth, and Sienna stood by the window and wondered how long it had been, since she'd had another person in the room with her and didn't want them to leave. She made tea. She didn't know why. She never made tea for company, because there was never company. She set a mug on the table beside Philippa without comment, and Philippa said, "Thank you," in a way that had the weight of meaning it. The hour passed in pieces. Sienna answered questions about the roads, about the nearest garage, about whether the main highway would be flooded. She did not answer questions about herself, and Philippa stopped asking them after the second deflection, which was more perceptive than most people managed. Axel moved once from the hearth to a position midway between the 2 women, where he lay down and put his nose on his paws and sighed. Philippa looked at him for a long time. Then she said, "I had a dog like this once. Not mine, my husband's military dog." Sienna looked at her. "His name was Bo. He worked with a canine unit out of CFB Petawawa." Philippa's voice was steady. "Careful. Cameron, my husband, was his handler." Was. Sienna heard it clearly, the past tense, sitting in the middle of the sentence like a stone in still water. "What happened?" she asked. She hadn't intended to ask. It came out before the habit of not asking could catch it. Philippa looked at the mug in her hands. "ID'd, Helmand Province, 2 years ago, February." She paused. "Bo made it back, Cameron didn't." Another pause. "I didn't feel right keeping Bo. He was a working dog, not a pet. He went to a handler with the Winnipeg Police Service. He's good." She said the last part quickly, like it was important to establish. "He's really good." The fire crackled. Axel lifted his head. He looked at Philippa. He put his head back down. Sienna sat down for the first time since the woman had arrived. She sat in the only other chair, the one she used for reading, pulled up near the stove, and she wrapped both hands around her own mug and she said, "I was at Kandahar, 2019. It was the first time she had said those words in that order since coming back. Philippa didn't ask anything. She just nodded, in the way that someone nods when they already understand the coordinates of a place you're describing, not because they've been there, but because they've spent years learning the shape of someone who has. "There was a compound breach," Sienna said. The words were coming out slowly, not painfully, just carefully, the way you move through a dark room when you're not sure of the floor. "Axel caught a wire. I got him out. The blast, my teammate, Corporal Jed Harwick, he was right behind me." She stopped, started again. "He didn't make it out." She hadn't said his name out loud since the memorial. Jed Harwick, 24 years old, from Swift Current, Saskatchewan. He liked hockey pool standings and bad country music and had a way of laughing that filled whatever room he was in like light fills a window. "I keep thinking," Sienna said, "that if I'd moved faster, if I'd called it differently, if I'd—" She stopped. She looked at her hands. "I got the dog out." 3 words that had lived inside her chest like a wound for 14 months. I got the dog out, and not him. Philippa set her mug down on the table. She leaned forward slightly, not reaching out, not touching, just present. Her voice was quiet and exact. "Bo couldn't sleep for a month after Cameron died," she said. "He paced all night. He checked every door. He kept going to Cameron's side of the bed and lying down and then getting up again." She paused. He wasn't looking for someone to blame. He was just carrying it, the way dogs do, without the story around it, just the weight. Sienna looked at Axel. Axel was watching her. He had always watched her like this, attentively, patiently, without judgment. In Kandahar, she had sometimes looked at him in the dark of the forward operating base and thought that he was the only creature in the world that understood what she was carrying, because he was carrying it too, and he never made her feel like she should put it down faster than she was ready to. "He chose you," Philippa said. "Jed didn't. What happened in that compound didn't. But Axel, every single morning he chooses you. He walks out those drills with you. He lies down at your door. He comes back." She held Sienna's gaze. "That's not guilt, that's loyalty. They're not the same thing." Sienna didn't say anything for a long time. The rain was still coming down outside. The fire had burned low, and the light in the cabin had gone amber and soft, and Axel had shifted so that he was lying between them, not at one woman's feet or the other's, but exactly between, like he was holding the space open. "Your husband," Sienna said finally. "Did you? How did you go back to work?" "After. I took 3 months," Philippa said. "Then I went back because I was a worse version of myself at home than I was at the hospital. I know that sounds clinical," she almost smiled. "But it's true, I'm useful there. Being useful matters when everything else feels like it's unraveling." Sienna thought about the log splitting, the perimeter drills, the 12-hour silences. "I've been trying to make myself smaller," she said. The recognition came as she said it, not before. "I thought I was protecting people from me, but I've just been hiding." Philippa didn't argue with that or affirm it. She let it sit, the way the good nurses always did, the ones who knew that the diagnosis didn't need their permission. When the tow truck came, its headlights swept across the cabin window in 2 white arcs. Axel stood, looked at the door, then looked at Sienna. She stood too. She walked Philippa to the gate. Axel came to the edge of the property and stopped and sat and watched. At the gate, Philippa turned. She had her car keys in one hand, and the borrowed rain jacket Sienna had found her in the other. She held the jacket out. "Keep it," Sienna said. Philippa nodded. "Then, there's a group at the hospital, veterans and first responders. They meet on Thursday evenings in the boardroom on the 2nd floor. It's informal. No one makes you talk. Nobody takes notes. Dr. Marguerite Ose runs it. She's good people." She paused. "I'm not suggesting you go. I'm just telling you it exists." Sienna took that in. She didn't say yes. She didn't say no. "Thank you for the tea," Philippa said. "Thank you for—" Sienna stopped. She wasn't sure how to finish the sentence. For coming in from the rain. For not asking too much. For saying his name, Jed Harwick, without flinching when she said it.
"For the first aid kit,"
she said finally. Philippa smiled. A real one, small and warm. She turned and walked to the tow truck, and Sienna watched the headlights disappear around the bend in the road. And then she and Axel stood in the rain for a moment, side by side, saying nothing. He leaned against her leg. Just once, briefly, his full weight against her. Then he straightened and looked up at her, and she looked down at him. She went back inside. She put another log on the fire. She moved the Sessican chair, the reading chair, slightly closer to the wood stove because it had been in a good position tonight, and there was no reason to move it back. She didn't sleep on the floor that night. She slept in the bed. It was the first time in 11 months. The Thursday of the first week came and went. She split wood. She ran Axel through his drills. She drove to the co-op and came back. She cooked soup from what she had and ate it standing up at the counter because she always ate standing up. And she thought about what Philippa had said. Not the part about the group, but the part about Beau, about carrying it without the story around it, just the weight. She thought about that for a long time. The Thursday of the 2nd week, she drove toward Vermilion Bay at 7:15 in the evening. Axel rode in the back seat. She told herself she was just driving. She told herself she was going to the hardware store, which was closed at 7:15, which meant she was lying to herself. And she knew it. She parked in the hospital lot and sat in the car for 6 minutes. Then she got out. She clipped Axel's lead. She looked at the building. It was a small regional hospital, the kind that had a chapel on the 2nd floor and a Tim Hortons on the main, and smelled like industrial cleaner and something trying hard to be cheerful. Sienna had been in hospitals like this after she came back. She had not liked it. She had left as quickly as possible both times. She walked to the main entrance. A security guard at the desk looked at Axel. "Service dog?" he said. "Yes," Sienna said. It was close enough to true. He nodded and waved her through. The boardroom on the 2nd floor had its light on, and through the narrow window in the door, she could see about 8 people arranged in a loose circle. Some in chairs, one sitting on the edge of the table, 2 holding coffee cups. A woman at the front had reading glasses pushed up on her head and was laughing at something someone had just said. Sienna stood at the door. Axel sat beside her. She nearly turned around. The reflex was so strong she actually shifted her weight back on her heel. Then the woman at the front, Dr. Marguerite Ose, she assumed, looked up and saw them through the window. She didn't wave, didn't make a beckoning gesture. She just held eye contact for a moment, neutral and open, and then she looked back at whoever was speaking in the circle. Not a summons. Just an acknowledgement. "You're here. That's enough." Sienna opened the door. The room didn't stop. No one turned to look at her with the terrible bright expectation of people who are waiting for someone new to arrive. A man with a prosthetic left hand nodded briefly. A woman in paramedic uniform slid her chair an inch to the left to make space in the circle. Axel walked in ahead of Sienna, assessed the room in one calm sweep, and lay down near the door with his chin on his paws. Sienna sat in the space that had been made for her. She didn't speak that night. She sat, and she listened, and Axel breathed steadily beside her. And when the session ended after an hour, and the room broke into smaller conversations, Philippa Lamont appeared from somewhere near the coffee station. She'd been there the whole time, somewhere behind Sienna's sightline, and handed her a cup without comment. "You came," she said. "I was in the area," Sienna said. Philippa's mouth curved. "Of course." They stood in the boardroom while people filtered out, and Axel accepted a careful scratch behind the ear from the man with the prosthetic hand, his tail moving in a slow, dignified arc. "You said Axel worked K9 unit," Philippa said. What was his designation? K9 Tango 7. Philippa was quiet for a moment. Then she said, slowly, like she was coming to something she hadn't expected, "Cameron mentioned that designation once, in a letter. He said there was a team in Kandahar they'd crossed paths with during a joint operation," he said. She paused. "He said the handler and the dog moved like one thing. He said it was the most coordinated pair he'd ever seen." Sienna went very still. She looked at Philippa. Philippa looked back. Her eyes were wet, but she didn't blink. "He wrote about you," Philippa said. Not accusingly, not sadly, just with the quiet certainty of something that had been true for a long time before either of them knew it. "He didn't know your name. He just said, 'The woman and the dog.' He said he'd never seen anything like it." The room was mostly empty now. The overhead light hummed. Axel had lifted his head and was watching the two of them with his amber eyes, reading something in the air between them that Sienna couldn't quite name. She thought about Cameron Lamont, a man she had never met, had never known existed, lying in the dark of a forward operating base somewhere in Helmand Province, writing a letter home to his wife about a woman and a dog he'd seen in Kandahar. She thought about how thin the membrane was between one life and another. She thought about Jed Harwick. She thought about how he used to say, every time they loaded into the vehicle for a new op, "We come back together, or we come back carrying each other. Those are the only options." She had spent 14 months believing she had failed that she had not come back with him, that she had left him, but she had carried him. Every morning she got up and split wood in the rain, she had carried him. Every drill she ran with Axel in the field behind the cabin. Every night she lay on the floor listening to the dog breathe because she couldn't bear the silence of the bed. She had been carrying him the whole time, and she had not understood that carrying was its own kind of faithfulness. She had not abandoned him. She had kept him with her. The only way she knew how. "I'm sorry," Sienna said. The words were not sufficient. They never were. But they were real and she meant them completely. "So am I," Philippa said. And then, "I think they would have liked each other, Cameron and Jed. I think they were probably the same kind of person." "Yeah," Sienna said. "I think so too." She didn't know why she was certain of that. She just was. They walked out of the hospital together, Sienna and Philippa and Axel, into the parking lot where the October air had cleared after the rain and the sky over Vermilion Bay was sharp with stars. Axel walked between them on a loose lead, his nails clicking on the wet asphalt, his ears up. At Sienna's truck they stopped. "Same time next Thursday?" Philippa said. Sienna looked at the hospital, looked at Axel, looked at the sky. "I don't talk," she said. "I'm not ready to talk. You don't have to, and I'm bringing the dog. The group loves Axel already," Philippa said. "Gerald was going to ask you about that, I could tell." Gerald, the man with the... Philippa gestured at her own hand. "Retired RCMP. He lost the hand in a standoff in 21. He doesn't talk much either. You'll like him." Sienna almost said, "I doubt that." She stopped herself. She opened the truck door. Axel jumped in and settled in the back seat, turning in a circle, claiming his territory with the authority of someone who has never once doubted their right to be somewhere. She got behind the wheel. She rolled the window down. "Philippa," she said. The nurse turned. "What was his designation?" Sienna said. "Cameron's dog. What was Beau's K9 designation?" Philippa looked at her. Something in her face shifted. not with pain, but with the particular relief of being asked something that mattered. K9 November 4. Sienna nodded once. She knew that designation. She had seen that team once across a fauve yard in the early morning, the handler and the dog silhouetted against a dust-colored sky. She hadn't known his name. She had noticed them the way you notice something true, without analysis, just recognition. She had been watching Cameron Lamont and not known it. She put the truck in reverse. Axel rested his chin on the back of the seat, watching Philippa through the rear window as the truck rolled slowly out of the parking lot. His tail moved, once, twice, in that same slow, dignified arc. Sienna drove back to the cabin through the dark. The road was still wet, the spruce trees close on both sides, the headlights cutting a yellow corridor through the night. She drove without music, without the radio, without anything. She didn't need the noise. The gate was still broken when she got home. It had been broken for months. The latch had gone in the spring, and she'd never fixed it, because there was no one she wanted inside. She fixed it the next morning, not because she was expecting anyone, not because she'd made a decision about Thursday or the group, or Dr. O.C. or any of it. She fixed it because it needed fixing, and because she was still there, and because some things you do simply to say, "I am keeping this place. I intend to stay." Axel sat in the field and watched her work, his head tilted, his ears forward. When the latch caught cleanly for the first time, she tested it twice. Opened it, closed it, it held. She looked at the dog, he looked at her. She walked back inside and put the kettle on, and left the gate unlocked behind her.